again, and welcome to War Stories. Media War Stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I am your host, Tom Curley. How are you all doing? Welcome to the show. Uh, we were off for a couple of weeks. I was out of town. I was a little busy, but now we're back. I'm back with my partner in crime here, Mr. Garry Armstrong, veteran TV news reporter. Garry, how the hell are you? What's up today? What are you doing? How you doing?
Doing okay. I was going to say, I think this is the first podcast we're doing when it's officially spring, but it doesn't feel or look like spring up here. But rather than go into a long, drawn out complaint, the whole country, for the most part, is going through some weird weather patterns right now. So, no point in complaining
Oh
about
yeah.
that.
Well, you know all
Belated
the
Happy
all
Easter.
the weather. Yes, a belated happy Easter. All the weather patterns are worse in the Midwest, and then we get the remnants. I guess we're getting the remnants of a really horrible storm that
Yeah,
went through the went through the Midwest. Apparently, a lot of snow. We're not getting it. I love a
yeah.
meteorologist once said, and it's true, enjoy this year. It's the coolest year you will experience for the rest of your life. And it's true. And it's sort of scary when you think about it, you
Yeah,
know,
yes,
because
yeah.
every year is hotter. So, every year is cooler. So I hear you got a story about a prison riot. Tell us about that one.
Well, in tabloid, Mark Hellinger, who used to do a lot of prison stories, um, I was involved in let's say avoiding a prison disturbance. It occurred at what was then called Walpole State Prison, located in the town of Walpole. Maximum security. That meant they had the worst of the criminals housed there, including, excuse me, including people like Albert DeSalvo, the proclaimed Boston Strangler, Lefty Gilday, who was the wheelman in a bank robbery with Susan Sachs, I think, which was famous. At any rate, apparently the prisoners, as they do frequently, and maybe with good reason, were complaining about life inside the big house. They were complaining about cleanliness, about food, etc. And apparently, one of the uh, one of the leaders of the inmates told the warden in no uncertain terms that they would accelerate their protest unless they could get their message to the media. And the warden, who was new on the job, thought, well, maybe I should take the easier way, and he summoned the media. So there were reporters from all the local stations, and on that day, I didn't know this at the point. The news director called me in and said, "We need to send you to Walpole." And I said, "What for?" And he said, "Well, the prisoners are threatening to riot or whatever." And I said, "Well, they do that often." And he said, "Yeah." So I said, what's the difference? Are we short of news today?" And he said, "Well, they're threatening they may riot and it may get ugly." And I said, "So why are you telling me this?" And he said, "Because they're asking for the media." And I said, "Yeah. And they have asked for you in particular." I said, "Oh, okay," because it had become known that I had had some conversations with Albert DeSalvo and some of the other people there. So I didn't really think that much about it. So we get to the prison, and the media is standing in a cluster. The warden spokesman, PIO person, walked over to us and said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to let you do a little warm up. We'll send a couple of you in to talk to the inmates, try to get a sense of what it's all about. Will it be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera." So the PIO looks at me and says, "Gary, why don't you go in first?" And I said, "Why me?" No, I said, "I appreciate it, but why me?" And he said, "Well, I don't know if I should tell you this, but they specifically asked for you. And they specifically called your station asking for you." And "What do you know, Gary?" And I said, "I don't know anything about this." So I said, "Okay, you can go in." And I summoned my crew to go with me. And then the PIO says, "No, no, no, no crew. The camera may really uh, make them emboldened to do something that they may not want to do. You just go in by yourself. I said, what? He says, yeah, Gary, they like you. Little did I know what would happen. So I go in with I had a prison, rather a corrections officer with me as backup, and they sent me into the maximum security area of this maximum security prison. And I see some faces, people I knew from previous interviews. And as I went around the corner, and I saw this bunch of inmates behind bars, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this really looks like one of those Warner Brothers movies. I wonder really what's going to happen. And as I walked towards the inmates, they went into song. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gary. And I looked at the guard, and he looked at me and just shook his head. And I said, "What the hell?" It was, I think, a day or two after my 31st birthday. How did they know? I don't know. Some of them had links with me, and I never talked about that. But they were serenading me, and I think that's in particular why they asked for me. So they finished singing me "Happy Birthday," and I said, "Oh, okay. Is there a cake?" And one guy says, "It's baking in the kitchen right now, GA. How many candles?" And I said, I'm going to see 40 before most of you do. And they said, "Oh, that's so great, Gary. Happy birthday to you." And the guard looks at me and says, "I don't friggin' believe this, Armstrong. I just don't. This has never happened before." And I said, "Ditto. Never happened to me before." So as we walked back out with the prisoners clearly and loudly singing "Happy Birthday, Gary Armstrong," the warden looks at me and says, "You've got some explaining to do, Gary." I said, "I didn't do anything." And he said, "That's what they all say. I didn't do anything." And he said, "Well, how do you account for these guys, these hardened criminals, these criminals who threaten to possibly go on strike and cause mayhem? They're in there loudly singing happy birthday to you." I said, "Warden, I have a face that people like. I don't know what else to say to you." And he said, "Well, maybe what we should do is invite you back every year on your birthday. And that way I know I'll have at least one day of peace and calm. What do you want to do now?" I said, "Well, maybe we should go back there with the cameras." And he said, "You mean you want to take your camera crew back there so that the prisoners can serenade you and you can put that on television?" And I said, "Sounds good to me, doesn't it?" He said, "Geez, the media can be such a bug." And I said, "Warden, I didn't set this up. I didn't ask them to sing. Uh, and Warden, they're one of the few groups of people who cared enough about me. I haven't heard from all of my family yet, Warden. What does it say to you that inmates in the worst prison in the state think more about me than maybe my family? What does that say to you?" And he says, "You got me there, kid." And we went in, and it turned out to be one of those off the wall type features that had little to do with the intent of the prisoners to go on strike. Big
Wow.
time, big house.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, the answer you should have given to the warden to why do they love you so much, you should have said, because I'm Samoan.
You were telling me just before we went on the air about a prison on Long Island, which I just don't remember.
It's the Nassau County Correctional Facility. And I don't know why I went there. I went there on a tour. It had to be related to the radio station. Um,
Hmm.
we must have been doing a story or something. And all I remember is that we went there and we did the tour, and it was it was scary. I mean,
Yeah,
you go, even though
yeah,
you're a guest at a prison, you know, every door behind you is locked, kung, you're deeper and deeper in the
yes.
system, and it's and I years later I visited Alcatraz, which was also an interesting
That's
um,
cool. Yeah.
cool. But anyway, we did the thing, and I didn't think anything of it. But one of the things that they said, because they were sort of proud of, was there was a movie called The Hot Rock. I think it was with George
Right.
Segal and a few other
And
people.
yeah, and
Um,
I think Redford, but I'm not sure.
yeah, I think that was it. Maybe Redford. Well, look, I always put up the movie poster, so
Yeah.
we'll
Anyway.
find out. But
Right.
anyway, they were so when the movie came out, we made sure to watch it because there's they escape. I guess they break somebody out of prison, and they filmed it at the Nassau County Correctional Facility. But what
Right.
always cracked us up as we were watching it was the roads that they went down. The sequence that they shot, that they edited the movie in, had no bearing on reality. Like, well, wait a
Yeah.
minute, that street doesn't connect to that street, and that street doesn't connect to this
Right.
street. But that's how all movies are made. I remember when
Yeah.
my wife and
Yeah.
I were in
We've
Hawaii.
had that up here. We
Um,
wonder how did they get
yeah,
there so quickly. Yeah. You know, we knew this was going to happen. Before you go to your story, one more prison story. We have a prison in up here in the town of Framingham. It's an all women's prison, and you know it's coming. I got assigned to go over there, and they were on the verge of rioting. And God knows why the station kept sending me into these situations. My thought is that the news director figured if I send Garry to enough of these prison stories, maybe he won't come back one day, and that'll take care of that problem. So I go to Framingham, and this is like I think most prison movies you've seen. You go there, and the women are really hardened. But in this case, instead of someone singing "Happy Birthday" to me, they were looking at me in suggestive ways and saying, "Tom, I don't know how else to put it." They were saying indecent things to me, which made me look down at my legs, and I sort of backed away. But they kept saying, "Honey, come on up. We like the way you're put together." And it was at that point that I backed off and said to another reporter, "You go first." He didn't get it, and I just moved back. And then my camera crew were just laughing and said, "You don't have any balls, Garry." And I said, "Yes, I
yeah,
do, and that's what they're talking about."
and that's the
All right, enough
that's
of
the
prisons.
problem. Oh my God. Well,
Oh
you're talking
wow.
about like shooting things out of sequence. My wife and I, a long time ago, we went to Hawaii, the island of Kauai, and we took a tour, an ATV, off-terrain vehicle tour. And one of the places they took us, it was a field in the middle of the jungle, and they go, "Oh, this is where they
Hmm.
shot the opening scene of the Indiana Jones, and the Raiders of the Lost Ark." The scene
Okay.
where Indy he's running toward the camera, and behind him are a whole bunch of natives who are shooting arrows at him, and
Yeah.
there's a plane in the river, and he's running toward the plane, and he's going, "Start the plane, start the plane, start the plane," and he jumps. Well,
Right.
he said that scene was filmed here, and he said the river is a couple of miles down the road, and so I mean, movies are shot out of sync, and
Right.
so
Right.
that's that. So my story in my little sheet, um, it's interesting. It's a story. All right, back when I was a senior at Hofstra, I lived in a house with two other roommates, Jimmy Cunningham and Eric Strickoff, and this is the year that we produced that show Fulton's Folly that I've talked about in the past, but not
Yes.
going to talk about here. The house was unique in that it was a very nice house. It was a ranch house that had three bedrooms and a dormer, a little like mother daughter at like a little apartment add on, and it was ridiculously cheap. Now, one of the reason that it was ridiculously cheap, that it was on, I think it was on Bethpage Avenue or something. It was on a big 4-lane highway, and across
Hmm.
and across the street was Grumman Aircraft. And in fact, directly
God.
across the street was the end of the runway for Grumman Aircraft. And there was a big bay window that looked out over this runway. And every day, twice a day, a weather plane
Hmm.
would take off and it would come right at us and it would lift up and it would go over our roof about 50 feet above the house.
Wow.
And also, it was a commercial area.
Wow.
On one side of
Yeah.
us was an Italian restaurant, and on the other side of us was the Mid Island Council headquarters of the Girl Scouts of America. So the reason the rent was so cheap is who in their right mind would live in a house like this? Well, the three of us, we loved it. You know, three stoners
I
every day
bet you
watching the
did.
plane coming at us, and we're going up, 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 a little higher, you know. And 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 then the other thing, we realized after we had been there for a number of months that we lived next door to the Mid Island Council headquarters of the Girl Scouts of America, and nobody had ever come by to try to sell us Girl Scout cookies, which we thought was, a little weird. So, so one day we were all stoned, which sort of a given, and we decided to go next door and try to sell them Girl Scout cookies, which we thought was a great idea. Well, it's weird, but they didn't see the humor in it at all. So then the other thing was we the landlord had a tenant. There was a guy that lived in the little apartment underneath,
Okay.
in the house. It had a private entrance.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I never saw the guy. Eric and I never saw the guy. Only Jimmy had run into him, and we didn't believe he existed. But none and I don't know what this guy was, but we had parties that you wouldn't believe, okay? Which I might tell you about. Loud, and this guy never complained. I don't know if he was deaf or what, but it was an interesting experience. So, but the story was, it's about technology. We now live, excuse me. WVHC when we were there was famous because it was monaural. All right, wasn't even
Right.
stereo.
Right.
Matter of fact, one of the jingles we used to say that the great thing about WVHC is we had fully separated two-channel mono. No matter which speaker you listen to, the sound comes out exactly the same. So you went from that, and then you went to stereo. Today we have surround sound. We have
Right.
5.2 surround sound. We have 7.2, which means there's 7 speakers. We have Dolby Atmos, which can have 10, 12 speakers. But there was a brief period in time that no one will remember where there was quadraphonic sound. Do you remember quadraphonic sound? Probably not.
I remember it, but I don't remember it at the station.
In the early 70s, there was a brief outburst of probably it was probably CBS and RCA, or no, it's Toshiba and I think CBS Records that put out a thing called quadraphonic sound. And instead of 2
Hmm.
speakers, there were 4 speakers, okay? And you bought a quadraphonic receiver and you had a record, an old vinyl record that was encoded in quadraphonic sound. Okay? So you had these 2 speakers and these 2 speakers. Well, WABC, actually WPLJ, ABC's FM station at the time, was going to institute quadraphonic sound. They were going to broadcast quadraphonic sound. And they needed to test the 2 systems. And in order to test it, they needed to basically set up one of their systems at a certain distance away from the transmitter and then do these tests. Now, George Berger, old dear friend of all of us at the rate, he was
Right.
the engineer at WABC/WPLJ who was tasked with doing this test. And our
Okay.
house was just the right um, distance. So they brought in and they brought in a state of the art Toshiba quadraphonic sound system with these huge speakers. I mean, like as tall as we were, and there was four of them.
Yeah.
And they brought out the the receiver. They hooked it all up, and then at midnight, PLJ basically signed off the air, or they did some tests. Okay, they would send out tones, and George had a whole bunch of oscillators and all sorts of equipment.
Right.
The machine that went ping, and they did their tests. Took them a couple of hours, and that was that. I think they did it on it was a Friday or a Saturday night. So when they left, George said, we won't come back to pick up the equipment till Monday. So, enjoy it. So us,
Right.
three young college kids who did not have a lot of money. And, we all worked now we've got this state-of-the-art sound system. Not just a state-of-the-art
Oh,
sound
I
system, a
see where this
state-of-the-art
is going.
quadrant. And we're like, let's party. So we're gonna test these things out. So our test record at the time, there was a song by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I can't remember the song, but at one point of the song, because it was all mostly synthesizer, there's a low bass note that is loud. I mean, it's low and it's
Okay.
loud. So we only had the thing cranked up half. In other words, we hadn't turned it up to 11. We'd only turned it up to 5.
Right.
And of course, we're
Right.
all very stoned. Again, a given. And we're all listening. And when it gets to that note, da 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 da, boom! This was the loudest sound we had ever heard. It was so loud that the curtains were vibrating. Okay, and as it finishes, here's what you heard. What was the conversation between the three of us? Eric goes, "That's the loudest sound I ever heard," and Jimmy goes, "Whoa," and I go, "Oh my God, I think we blew the speaker." That's the loudest sound I ever heard. Whoa. Oh my God, we did. There's a big hole in the speaker. We blew a hole in the
Oh
woofer.
my goodness.
So now the sound is, and now we're going like, oh my God. And for some reason, they're still in that's the loudest sound I ever heard. And I'm going, what are we going to do? We can't afford this. So now we're in a panic for the next 2 days. We're completely freaking out. And what are we going to do? This thing must cost thousands of dollars. So George comes Monday and we go, look, George, we're really sorry. And we tell him what happened and he laughs. And he goes, that's hilarious. He goes,
Of
well,
course.
what are we going to do? He said, I'm going to give them their speakers back and tell them that their stuff is shit. I said, part of my job is breaking stuff and, to stress test it. And he said, Dad, you did me a favor. So we spent all weekend just, in absolute terror. And it turns out it was for nothing. And it's interesting because I don't think that WPLJ ever adopted either of those systems. Quadraphonic sound, it came and went, I don't know, maybe in less than a year. And
Right.
it's not the first one that did that. Recently, everybody forgets. All right, there was there was VHS and Betamax. All right, VHS 1. There was Blu-ray and something HD. The Blu-ray player one. Nobody remembers either because now everything is up in the cloud. So technology, it's fascinating. Technology that dies, that's useless technology, and there's so much of it
Yeah.
that the rare smart person that here's a perfect example right here. All right. Um,
Yes.
a guy that will collect every one of these old machines, and now they make a good living converting people's old technology, slides.
Yes.
Um, I had an 8 millimeter movie. I got converted. Uh, CDs. CDs are now an obsolete technology. DVDs are an obsolete technology. Now everything is, I mean, God, see this thing here? This thing is a holder for a chip that's this big, and it's got,
Yes.
20, 30, 100 gigabytes on it. It's really amazing. But anyway, that was just I thought a funny story
That's a
of
that's a funny story, and I want to come back to what you're just talking about. So don't let me drift too far. I'm fascinated, if that's the right word, because your friend here has been hearing challenged all of his life. Uh, I don't even with my cochlears, it's improved, of course, but I don't get the subtleties when you go from, let's say, stereophonic to quadraphonic or whatever. I don't get it. I'm beginning to with the cochlear implants. I have different devices, and I'm fooling around with it now. But I don't know whether I can say, "Golly, did I miss something?" If I had been there with you guys, I wonder if I would have been blown away, or if I could really appreciate the loudness of the equipment you had that weekend.
that's a good question. Because like I said, looking back, it's primitive. What I find amazing is like right now, your phone, okay? Um, the phone has the two speakers left and right or here and here. And yet, if I'm
Yeah,
listening to a movie or something, I hear the sound here, 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 because the same thing with Dolby Atmos, they figured out how to combine all the frequencies so that you hear it at a certain point in space because that's how you
right,
if this happened in real life, that's how you would do it, and they've gotten so good at it that I mean I notice it. I'm going like, one, how the hell am I hearing something over here when the speakers are both
right,
over here? So I mean we've
right.
made a lot of gains.
Yes,
um,
yes.
yeah. So anyway, let's get on to the plugs as quickly as we can. Serendipity Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth, our favorite blog. Voicescapes Audio Theater, the best in audio theater and drama. A half-hour radio show. God damn, that is still funny. And of course, my sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn with me, Tom Curley, where we talk about life, the universe, and everything. Gary, we pulled it off again. Until next week, let's hope we remember what we were going to talk about because we probably won't. But anyway, see ya.